Welcome to Buried Secrets, a podcast about the paranormal, the occult, and weird and forgotten history. I'm Chris. This episode is part of my series about the history and hauntings of Fordham University, which is a Jesuit school in the Bronx. It's a college. And this episode is kind of a random, weird topic that I came across while I was researching. And at first I was like, ooh, there's a story of a curse, etc. And then as I dug deeper, it became a little bit more upsetting and less paranormal. But I still think this is an interesting story. I want to talk this time about the curse of the Fordham Ram. And just right off the bat, I wanted to make it clear that this story is about animal abuse and, at the very best, animal neglect, and at the very worst, animal abuse. So if that is something that you are sensitive to, that's what this whole episode's about. And basically, the story here is, as I was doing my research, I kept hearing about this weird supposed curse on the school mascot. Fordham's mascot is the ram, which, is a male sheep. And for a long time, the university had a real ram that lived on campus, and they trotted out this ram for football games and different sporting events, that sort of thing, but it was just there on campus all the time. And this is well after Fordham. Fordham at one time did have a farm on campus, but this was well after that, so there was just this random animal living on campus. And there are a few reasons why I wanted to tell this story. One, I think it's a weird story that adds something to this narrative about Fordham that I'm crafting, and it feels like a weird thing to leave out of the history since I've gone so in depth about so many other things. But much more importantly, I think that this points out a real problem that happens in the paranormal, which is often a story about a haunting or an urban legend ends up getting woven around something really bad, either perhaps as a way to evade responsibility and to obfuscate something bad that happened in the past, or maybe to avoid looking at an issue right on its face. I don't think this is necessarily a thing that consciously happens. I don't think people look at something upsetting or uncomfortable in history and think, well, I don't want to think about that. I'm just going to say a ghost did it, or there's a curse, or whatever. I don't think it's as direct and conscious as that, but I do think that's something that happens a lot in the paranormal. And this is a topic I want to explore more in general. I've been reading a lot about urban legends and ghost stories, and, there are a lot of paranormal stories that end up getting tied to stories of perhaps racially motivated violence or sexual violence, etc. And I think it's just a good thing to get into the habit of noticing when that happens and digging into it and challenging. And I'm not saying that something upsetting in history can't cause a haunting, but I more so want to try digging into urban legends and kind of asking the question of is there maybe a haunting here, or is someone just trying to make up a good story and or trying to make someone look better or make yourself feel better about your part in something, or a history that maybe you weren't a part of but feel implicated in? So this is me very much wading into the shallow end of this topic, because in this story I'm talking about a ram, or really a series of rams. But you can expect me to kind of keep thinking about this subject over the coming months. So anyway, I mentioned before, rams are male sheep. I've seen pictures of the different rams that used to live at Fordham, and they look like adorable, fluffy, helpless sheep, just with horns because they're rams. So, like I said before, Fordham's mascot is the ram, and the reason why, supposedly, is because supposedly at football games, students used to shout, 1 dam, 2 dam, 3 dam, 4 dam. But the administration didn't like it because of the cursing, so they made the mascot of the college the ram, so they could say 1 ram, 2 ram, 3 ram, 4 dam. Fordham. I don't know. I don't really think it works better, but I guess there's no cursing in it, so fine. Anyway, in 1927, the brilliant minds of Fordham University decided to get a live ram to bring out as a mascot at sporting events. And what happened next, as I've alluded to, was not good. As ram after ram, all named Ramses, by the way, and I think about 28 total, as ram after ram died in horrible ways, people began to claim that the ram was cursed. And there's a part of me that thinks, maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe this ram was cursed, but I don't think it was like a paranormal curse. I think these rams were just cursed to have drunk college students taking care of them for many years. And in case you're wondering, if you went to Fordham where this ram lived, it sounds like the rams, each one of them, lived behind Queen's Court near the Metro-North train tracks. Oh, also worth noting, Fordham had a major rivalry, and I think still does, kind of, with Manhattan College, which is another university that's in the Bronx. Manhattan College shows up in this story a lot, with students abducting Ramses, though I've also heard accounts of NYU and maybe even Georgetown students abducting Ramses. I don't know, these college hijinks are really strange. And I do find it kind of fascinating and weird. I don't understand why the people in this story do the things they do. And it really doesn't make me respect the people in these stories. But anyway, let's get into it. So I found this article called The Curse of the Fordham Ram, which was published in The Ram, which is the university student newspaper, on October 14th, 1982. And this story recounts some of the trials and tribulations of the different Ramses. So to read from that, most Fordham students are familiar with these supernatural aspects of the university, but one strange yet true tale has thus far escaped notice: the curse of the Fordham Ram. The terrible legacy began in 1927 when a naive group of students procured a live mascot for the university and christened him Ramses. Since that time, every animal bearing that unfortunate title has been stricken down in the most unusual and sickening ways. And pausing here, I do remember when I was a student being told some of these stories about the ram being kidnapped and killed in horrible ways, by Manhattan College students, as the urban legend goes. Don't really think that anything was as extreme as the stories I was told when I was a student, but there were definitely a lot of urban legends about it when I was a student. So to continue reading, Ramses the First himself was felled on a cloudy, moonless night by a speeding passenger train. His shaggy head was subsequently decapitated and mounted on a, quote, handsome walnut shield, as the unfeeling ram, the newspaper The Ram is what this article is talking about, proudly announced. This ghoulish adornment graced both the front page and office wall of The Ram until 1930, and for this reason, students and administrators alike accused the Ram editors of strapping poor Ramses to the tracks. However, a series of fiendish accidents started in the mid-1950s and made it all too clear that no mortal being was responsible. So you can really feel this article working to construct this theory of the paranormal, and it seems that it's sort of joking, but also sort of not. It has a very ironic tone. It's being really heavy-handed with kind of the, quote, funny aspects of this story. But, ghoulish is the right word for this story, But not ghoulish because there's a ghost. Ghoulish because, even from the beginning, this poor animal, probably they didn't, close the gate wherever the ram was being held. It probably wandered off to the tracks, and then for some reason the newspaper thought it would be a good idea to take its head and mount it on the wall. I think it's very, very strange. Also, just to correct some things in this 1982 article, bad things did happen to Ramses before the 1950s as well, and there's actually a whole section of the Fordham Library website that is called The Toils and Troubles of Ramses, Ramses Dynasty, 1925 to 1978. So let's meet the different Ramses and see what happened to all of them. So the library claims that Ramses I actually came into the scene in 1925, not 27, and was kidnapped by a rival school and sent to a slaughterhouse. I don't know who's correct. And then Ramses II supposedly met the same fate. Ramses III, according to the library, was a, quote, troubled animal. I think that's how they put it there. Possibly because rams aren't supposed to be kept on urban campuses in New York City and abused by college kids. At any rate, he was apparently, quote, aggressive and often ran away from campus and tried to attack the New York Central trains, which were the trains that are running by campus, because, the train tracks are right there along an edge of campus. So trains were delayed, conductors were mad. So instead of maybe building a better habitat that the ram couldn't escape from, Ramses II was instead, quote, sentenced to death in December 1927 and executed, to use the library's phrasing, by the Fordham Rifle Team. There's a lot going on in that story. I don't think that Fordham has a rifle team anymore, for example. So, for some reason, a lot of the accounts of what happened to these rams sort of disagree with each other. So, for example, I found an article from the 1930s that claims that Ramses III met a different, maybe more upsetting fate. I don't know, maybe the numbering is off, like if the rams that the library says were 1 and 2 were actually unnumbered Ramses, and then it started over again with the numbering in 1927, and maybe what the library thinks was 3 was actually 1, I don't know. But at any rate, in the November 13th, 1930 issue of the Ram, you'll find a front page above the fold article with a headline proclaiming, Ramses III, Maroon Monarch, dead. Long live his successor, Ramses IV. Fordham mascot succumbs to attacks of wild dog pack at dead of night. Students mourn loss. So you can see all of these articles about the ram dating back to, the 20s and 30s kind of seem ironic, which is very weird. So I wanted to read a bit of this article, which is slightly graphic. And if the story I read earlier about the ram being decapitated upset you, you probably shouldn't listen to this episode because it doesn't really get less graphic in stories about animals being hurt. So, to read from this article. They found him Monday morning on what we call the Ramkin Field over behind St. John's Hall. No one knows exactly what happened, but enough could be seen to piece together the story. He lay tangled in the long, heavy chain that kept him to the stake. The ground about was torn and uprooted, and white fleece scattered all around him. How long he fought that night, stubbornly and silently, St. John's is only 50 yards away and no sound was heard, hampered with his chain, a white blotch for his enemies in the blackness, we can only guess. Of the marauders we know nothing. The only hit is that a number of dogs were seen on the campus early Sunday evening. Whatever did the bloody work slunk off before daylight. The knell of the chapel bell is rung, the ram is gone. His ghost harbored in the mounted head will stare down enigmatically by day from one of the college walls, and by night through the centuries will wander through the corridors and over the campus, munching quizzically. The ram is dead, long live the ram. So again, there's immediately this desire to reframe the whole thing as a creepy ghost story. And part of me is also is this just what Joe College was like back in the day? Just doing some hijinks and making some jokes? I don't know. But at any rate, based on this article, it wasn't just Ramses I whose head was mounted and displayed somewhere on campus. I did find an article, that contained the picture of at least one of the ram heads, the one at the Rams newspaper office in the basement of St. John's Hall, now Queen's Court. I really wonder what happened to these ram heads. Did someone just take them home? Did they throw them away? I don't know. So the library website continues listing the Ramses dynasty and everything that happened to these different rams. So Ramses IV was known for liking to eat cigarettes. So, that's not healthy eating habits for a ram, I would assume. According to a 2019 article in the Fordham Observer, which is the Lincoln Center newspaper, so the newspaper of the Manhattan campus of Fordham, in 1933, Ramses V was kidnapped by NYU students, and New York State police had to help track him down, and they found him 300 miles away, somewhere in Connecticut. The cops grabbed him and brought him back to New York City as quick as they could, so Ramses could attend the Fordham NYU game. We don't know much about Ramses the 6th through the 8th, but we do know that they died early in life. No surprise there, especially people are still feeding them cigarettes. I'll read what the library had to say about Ramses the 8th, which weirdly echoes what happened to Ramses the 5th in 33. Not sure if this happened twice or if the dates got confused. The first Ramses to grow old and die of natural causes. Kidnapped by NYU and taken to a Connecticut farm, New York State troopers picked him up at the state line and he was escorted to the game by 4 squad cars and 6 motorcycles, sirens blaring. He arrived just in time for halftime. He also made headlines in 1941 when he escorted models at the British Relief Society's fashion show. Also, there's a picture of Ramses the 8th with 2 football players, and Ramses just looks like the cutest, fluffiest animal I've ever seen. I'll have to see if I can dig up that picture and post it on social media or something, or in the show notes. He's very, very cute. In 1948, apparently the Ram ran an article imploring volunteers to guard Ramses from NYU students because, to quote that article, it would be very discouraging to have him show up at the polo grounds on November 27th on the wrong side of the field. So again, more college hijinks. Also, just a side note, my radiators in the apartment are being really, really loud. I'm going to try to fix it in post as much as I can, but there's not a place in the apartment that is not very, very loud right now, and most evenings right now, so I'm sorry about that. I'll try to fix it as much as I can. So anyway, back to Ramses. The library website says we don't know much about Ramses the 9th through the 15th, so we can pick back up with the 1982 article, which says, in 1954, Ramses the 16th died under mysterious circumstances. Although foul play was suspected, the murderer was never found. 3 years later, Ramses the 17th narrowly escaped a heinous kidnapping attempt by inept Manhattan students, but did not survive a second time when the luckless beast vanished one day and was brutally slaughtered. Maybe worth noting, the library website says that killing happened in 1955. To get back to the 1982 article, Ramses the 18th fared little better than his predecessor. In 1958, the Ram House was gutted by a fierce blaze that Fire Marshal Victor Delancey called, quote, the most blood-curdling sight a man could ever witness. Although Delancey strongly suspected arson, this case too remained unsolved. Here's what the library has to say about Ramses the 17th, who the library claims had, an issue with that fire. So to read from that, homeless after his shed burned down under mysterious circumstances, he was the first to move in to a 2-bedroom with running water Ram house built by Kelly Bricklayers, a business owned by Princess Grace's father. He, the Ram, died of alcohol-related liver disease in 1961. So I read this and I was like, is this some kind of not in super good taste joke? But no, I did further research and I learned that students were giving Ramses alcohol whenever Fordham won games. And I would guess probably sometimes when Fordham lost too. So he really did die of liver disease. And again, we're talking about a bunch of rowdy college students mistreating a defenseless sheep. So at times this story, to me at least, feels so absurd it seems like made up. And then I have to just keep reminding myself that this was a very cute, fluffy animal who didn't deserve to be treated this way. So Ramses the 19th, whose nickname was Thumper, was kidnapped by Manhattan College students who dyed him green, which is Manhattan College's school color. There's a Ram article detailing this 1961 kidnapping, and apparently the kidnappers bought all of the green food coloring in Tarrytown/Sleepy Hollow in order to dye Ramses green. It's a long story, and I'm too exhausted by reading about all the bad things that happened to Ramses to go into it, but I'll include a link in the show notes to this article if you want to know the whole tale behind this kidnapping. Ramses the 20th was around in the mid-1960s, and his nickname was Fatty. He was also a very cute ram. In 1965, students from Iona College, which is in New Rochelle, so just outside the city, tried to kidnap Ramses, but they were foiled by Fordham students. That happened twice in 2 weeks. Ramses the 20th died of pneumonia. Ramses the 21st was the most kidnapped ram. He apparently spent more of his career as a mascot at rival campuses than at Fordham's. I don't totally understand why it was a thing to repeatedly steal this animal. I wonder if this was a thing among all colleges in the 20th century, or if this is just a weird, cruel New York City East Coast type thing. I don't know, it's very strange. So to go back to the 1982 article, the next story talks about Ramses the 22nd dying in 1970. It sounds almost made up. But supposedly, Ramses disappeared for months and then was found by a street cleaner who, quote, found his bleached skull near Madison Square Garden. Dental records confirmed the poor creature's identity. Which I feel like that's just gotta be a joke, right? Or just like incorrect. To keep reading, just 2 years later, the bloated green carcass of Ramses the 23rd was discovered dangling by his horns from the Whitestone Bridge. Every Ramses since then has become so violently insane that they had to be destroyed. So I'd been told this bridge story when I was a student. I remember a professor told me about it. However, a 2019 article in the Fordham Observer claims that Ramses the 23rd lived a long life and retired to Birch Hill Game Farm in upstate New York. So was sent to a farm upstate, but I think for real. So I think this Whitestone Bridge thing is just an urban legend. I've also heard a version of the story where the bridge he was hanged from was the GW Bridge. So I think it's just an urban legend. And it feels like, from reading, all these ghost stories and stuff, it feels like so many urban legends about Fordham got really codified in the 1980s. I don't know why. I don't know if it was like people were just looking for like creepy stories. I don't know if it was like, the satanic panic was in the news and people were thinking about paranormal explanations and sinister things. I don't know. It's very strange and interesting though. So the article goes on to talk about how Ramses the 24th, can't believe there were so many, the 24th attacked a cheerleader at a baseball game in 1974 and, quote, bit off a piece of her leg. And incidentally, 1974, if I'm remembering correctly, was the first year that women were allowed to be students at Fordham, like officially. There had been a women's college for about 10 years before that was affiliated with Fordham. And I definitely know people whose grandma, like I have a friend whose grandma went to Fordham way, way before that in the early 20th century, like mid 20th century. But I think like officially they didn't let women in, but it sounds like they let women take classes there sometimes. I don't know. Anyway, Ramses supposedly attacked a cheerleader. I also read elsewhere that Ramses the 24th was actually a sheep. But the extremely intelligent Fordham students who were in charge of the Ramses stuff didn't realize it until, quote, he gave birth to a ewe, like a baby sheep. So these are some real big brain geniuses over here. They can't tell the difference between a ram and a sheep, even though rams have horns. I guess there were a few other issues with Ramses over the next couple of years, and then the last straw was when Ramses the 27th got into a fight with a horse in 1978 at the Pelham Bit Studios. However, I've also read in that 2019 article that Ramses the 27th accidentally broke his own neck by twisting his head in the fence around his pen in 1975. And I tend to believe the 2019 article more. It seems, like Occam's razor, that seems more likely that he just got caught in the fence versus like got into a fight with a horse. I don't know. So after that, after 50 years of issues with having a live mascot on campus, the university decided that there would be no more live rams living on campus. And remember what I said about like satanic panic stuff in the 80s and people trying to kind of like make things seem creepy? Here's how the 1982 article ends. Yet there exists one small fear harbored by those who know of the doomed Ramses' heritage. Without a sacrificial ram, where will the angry force that plagues the campus vent his ancient rage? Given the demon's past modus operandi, the student who wears the ram suit would be wise to be on his guard, lest he find himself painted green and hanging from the nearest bridge, the latest but not the last victim of the curse of the Fordham ram. And, as this article suggests, nowadays there is just like a person in a ram suit instead of a live ram at games. So based on all of this, I of course think that it is a good thing that there's no longer a live ram living on campus and being mistreated. And like I said, I mostly am telling the story just because I think it's like strange and illustrates this thing about the paranormal, like both the idea of like myth making and kind of like jokingly making up urban legends that then potentially can get repeated a little bit more seriously, or that could potentially turn into something more paranormal or seemingly more paranormal, right? And like with this, like I don't think I have no memory of really hearing anyone talk about a paranormal story behind the ram mascot having so many ill-fated deaths. I definitely remember it being more of a focus on like school rivalries and, not so wise college students making bad decisions. But like I said, it's easy to look at a chain of untimely deaths and attribute it to the paranormal, and you can become so wrapped up in weaving a chilling story that you can potentially forget or obfuscate real evil or, at least cruelty that may have been done. The story, of course, is lower stakes than perhaps some other urban legends that may have arisen around cruelty or abuse or that sort of thing. We are talking about an animal. And of course, I've eaten plant-based for years and I was a vegetarian for 10 years before that. So I think probably just because I don't see animals as food, I probably have like a little bit different of a perspective than like an average meat eater might have on this topic. But I think probably anyone can agree that like a cute, harmless animal probably shouldn't have been like fed cigarettes and alcohol and kidnapped by different students and dyed green and like all this weird stuff. And so, while the stakes may be a little bit lower in this story because we are talking about animals, and I think most people would agree with me when I say that human life and stories about bad things happening to people is a lot more important and upsetting than abuse happening to an animal, because, this is an animal that people kill and eat anyway. I'm not really trying to explore like animals and the value of animal life here. I'm really interested in what this kind of is an entry point into in thinking about how perhaps the paranormal and stories of hauntings might paper over some really bad stuff that may make us uncomfortable, but which are important for us to acknowledge and grapple with because, these things may still be happening now, right? Like many of the hottest spots to do paranormal investigations are old prisons, insane asylums, and hospitals. And I do think it can be really easy to investigate those places and just focus on the spooky aspects of it. And, even if you're thinking about the atrocities happening in those locations and you're trying to honor the history through the paranormal stories that you dig up, I also think it's essential to ask yourself if the terrible things that happened at, say, a closed former prison are perhaps still happening now. And, what about medical trauma in old hospitals? Are people still suffering unnecessarily in the hands of an uncaring medical system today. I'm not saying that all paranormal investigations have to give like equal time to social justice topics. I certainly don't do that, and to be honest, I don't really want to do that because paranormal research and investigation, for me at least, is a hobby and like a little bit of an escape. But with any kind of historical research and any attempt to tell stories from human history, I do think it's just important to make sure to peel back the layers of urban legend, campfire story type narrative, and look at what's really occurring in a supposedly paranormal situation. In the case of Ramses, you read the article from 1982 and it's easy to be like, oh, there's a curse. How creepy and fun. After all, the campus is super haunted. It makes sense that there would be a curse. Why else would all these bad things happen to a couple dozen rams? But then once you really sit with the stories and peel back the sensationalism a little bit, you can start to glimpse at what's really happening, which is, that an animal is being abused, mistreated, etc. And once you see what's really happening in a story, I think that's a call to look around yourself and ask yourself, do I live in a system that still allows this sort of thing to happen today? What are the ways in which I participate in making things worse? Is there anything I can do to make it better? And I'm not really saying that you should come away from the story about the ram being like, how do I make animals' lives better? Like, sure, if that's what you want to take from it, that's totally fine and valid, I guess. But, the point I'm really trying to make here is about urban legends and hauntings that involve people. But of course, I'm not really interested in telling people what to do or how to think. And I will say that everyone who I know in the paranormal is really engaged in these topics and really does talk about this sort of thing. And I know, everyone I know thinks about this sort of thing a lot. But I'm kind of trying to make a larger statement about how we as a society view urban legends, hauntings, curses, etc. And I don't know, I'm just trying to offer some additional lenses through which some stories of the paranormal can be viewed. And I look at this ram story and I don't see anything paranormal happening. I just see a pretty simple A to B, a animal is treated badly, the animal dies story or trajectory. There's just not anything mysterious in this story to me or anything unexplained. Like, the weirdest bit of it to me is when the ram got attacked maybe by wild dogs. But all the rest of it kind of makes sense, and there's a very, very clear mundane explanation for those things. So they almost like debunk themselves as much as, the writer of that article wanted to wrap things in the trappings of an urban legend. And to be clear, I'm not trying to vilify the writer of this article or anything. Like, I get it. Like, you have a deadline, you need to fill some space, you need to make the story interesting. Fine. But I just think it's a topic that's, like, important to keep in mind when you're thinking about urban legends and tales of the paranormal. Oh, and since I mentioned prisons, if you do feel so inclined, I am going to include some links to some bail funds in the episode description and show notes for this episode. I've talked a lot about Rikers Island in the past. It is a really awful jail in my neighborhood that is in the process of being shut down, but it's not happening quickly enough. And most of the people, like 80-ish% of the people in there, have not been convicted of a crime and are just waiting for trial and can't make bail. So I'll include 2 bail funds for Rikers Island and for the boat, which is a jail barge off the coast of the Bronx, which is also bad. Both of the bail funds that I'll post are community-run, mutual aid bail funds that can help literally save lives by getting people out of these really dangerous jails. So with that, that's the curse of the ram at Fordham. I'm almost done wrapping up the Fordham series. I just have 1 to 2 more episodes coming next. I want to look at some of the common causes of hauntings or, theorized causes of hauntings and kind of like go through the list of all the different things that people say could cause a haunting, or at least a selection of them, and look at which of those things Fordham has and kind of come up with a hypothesis about why I think Fordham is haunted, what explanations I think are the most likely. I have gone and compared the number and types of hauntings that Fordham has with some other similar universities. And, I have been telling myself that I'm just going to have one wrap-up episode where I talk about what causes hauntings, why are places haunted, but probably it'll be two based on what my notes look like now. So that's coming next. Also, one thing I wanted to mention is I have added my notes and scripts for each episode to my website, buriedsecretspodcast.com. And in the future, I'm going to try to make my scripts a little cleaner and easier to read. I hadn't previously written them with other people in mind, but I was thinking about it the other day and I was like, I really would like this to be more accessible, both in terms of like people being able to quickly look up information from an episode on the website and also people who aren't able to listen to the episodes. So that's now on the website. As you go back in time, the notes get messier and less complete, but there were more than 200,000 words worth of notes that I had. So there was no way I had time to proofread them or anything. So going forward, I'll try to make my notes a little cleaner, a little nicer, and more friendly to anyone who wants to read them on the website. So that's buriedsecretspodcast.com. You can follow me at Buried Secrets Podcast on Instagram. I've been posting, old pictures of Fordham and that sort of thing. So you can check that out there. You can write to me at buriedsecretspodcast@gmail.com. And if you liked this episode, please rate and review it. Please tell your friends about it. It really helps other people find the podcast. And thanks so much for listening.